Good morning and welcome to EG's Future of Birmingham event. Glad that you could join us. I'm Tim Burke, EG's Deputy Editor. This is a slightly different format to the one that we expected to be using only a few weeks ago when we would have gathered in the city itself. But of course, plans have to change given the times that we are in. Nonetheless, we have got two great panels for you this morning with a short break in between. We'll be discussing visions for the future of Birmingham and the wider region, the role and the responsibilities that the real estate industry has in shaping those, and of course, unavoidably, the challenges that are presented by the crisis that we currently face in the coronavirus pandemic. We're grateful for the support of our series partner Savills, event partners Avison Young and Shoesmiths, as well as ACES on today's event. Now, across both panels, we would encourage you to submit questions for our guests. You should be able to see a Slido box alongside our live stream that you can tap those into. If for any reason you can't, you can also go directly to the Slido website. So that's at www.sli.do. And you can enter a question there with the hashtag EGFutureCities, EGFutureCities. Now, in this first panel, we will discuss the significant challenges that Birmingham, like many other cities, has faced over recent weeks. How is real estate responding? What priorities are changing? What effect will this have on the future of the city as property works to provide sustainable, resilient environments? I'm joined for this by Michael Davies, Director in the Planning Division at Savills, Jacqueline Homan, Head of Environment at the West Midlands Combined Authority, and David Perry, a partner at law firm Shoesmiths. Thank you all for being with us this morning.
Good morning.
Jacqueline, I hope it's okay to turn to you first. I was wondering if you could give us some insight into how you've seen the city and the wider region fare during the unprecedented challenges that we've seen over recent weeks from the COVID-19 pandemic, and how has the city and the region responded?
Yeah, okay, sure. So I can talk very much from a West Midlands Combined Authority perspective, and Birmingham City Council is obviously one of the constituent authorities that forms part of the West Midlands Combined Authority. So I think the approach has been, or we could split the approach into three parts. So in terms of response, resilience and recovery. And the Combined Authority is working really hard to make sure that we provide support for business and try and understand some of the economic impact that sits around the current pandemic, as well as community support too. So we've set up some microsites as part of our Combined Authority response, where we can direct both businesses and communities to a whole range of information to support them through the current crisis. And there's also been an economic impact group established by the Mayor's Office. It has 35 members on it that draw from the private sector, so including construction, the TUC, the 3 local enterprise partnerships, the 7 local authorities, and also some national partners, including the Bank of England and the British Business Bank, as well as national government. And I think we're trying to take, an all-stakeholder approach towards managing the crisis and working very closely with partners at both a local, regional and national level to ensure we're able to support where it's needed.
And let's talk about what the private sector can do here. I mean, Michael, maybe you can talk us through Savills' response.
Yes, well, in terms of a planning situation, which is where I sit in the company, we are still progressing planning applications. We're working with a range of planning authorities around the region, and their response has been first class. They've adapted well. Material that we're submitting is being read and being processed. Now, clearly some of the stakeholders involved in the process will not all be able to respond at the same speed, so there is undoubtedly going to be some delay. In a wider sense, across the property sector, I'm hearing from colleagues that are also adapting. So in terms of new homes, we're doing video viewings of properties. In terms of the logistics sector, there's still a strong demand for space. So there are some good news stories. It's not all doom and gloom, but I think what I'm seeing across the piece is people adapting, and communication is very very strong.
And David, your take on this from you and colleagues at Shoesmiths?
Well, I agree with everything that the other panelists have said, actually, that this has absolutely been about people pulling together, and it's absolutely been about people not trying to extract any advantage, but work out what needs to be done and actually getting that done. So we've been involved with our clients and stakeholders, landlords and tenants, for example, holding webcasts to get people talking. I think more than anything else now, our role has been to actually get people talking, get people thinking about what needs to be done. And just picking up on what Jacqueline said, it's absolutely about response, resilience and recovery. There will be an end to this. What it looks like at the end will be different to what it looked like at the beginning. But it's all about working out how we get there and getting there in the least painful, most positive way.
Absolutely. Michael, what near-term effects might we expect to see on the ongoing development and regeneration of various parts of the city?
I think there's going to be a mixed response across the sectors. One of my concerns was the ability for construction workers to get on site and complete projects. Although only yesterday the Secretary of State issued a very positive letter saying that the construction does need to carry on, and those that wish to can actually access sites. So I think that's a positive position. In terms of the processing of development projects, one of the problems we're coming up against at the moment is the inability for specialists to go out and do site-specific surveys, or surveyors to go out and survey buildings. So I think there's clearly going to be a delay on other projects, but I think in terms of the construction sector, there is clearly an opportunity to carry on. Clearly, in what manner each will be different, I guess. The key question, I suppose, for the city and the wider region is the Commonwealth Games, because that is one project we all want to see happen and run successfully. Question: will there be a delay in getting that going?
What is the assumption at the moment on that front?
Well, I guess the news yesterday that construction work can carry on is only helpful in that regard. I guess at the end of the process, will it have been delayed in completion? I don't know the answer to that, but hopefully the measures, the positive measures that government are taking at the moment are encouraging. Another which affects my side of the business, coronavirus bill was issued passed last week, which enables planning committees and other local authority meetings to take place without councillors being present. So again, I think the government in many areas have reacted very quickly and soundly to the restrictions that we currently have.
David, which areas of the market might you expect to see as the most resilient during this challenging time?
I suppose it's anything that's going to be longer term. So at one extreme, you've got strategic land type work, which might have a time horizon of 20 to 40 years. Long-term development, that's, in a sense, it is not likely to be immediately impacted by this because the timelines are so long. At the other end, you've got things like residential sales, where it's been somewhat more acutely felt. Everything seems to have come to pretty much a standstill. You've got areas such as retail. Well, retailers are very hastily having to reposition what they do and having to think about shifting from bricks and mortar provision to online provision. So I think in terms of resilience, nobody's packing up and going home here. What everybody is doing is changing the shape of what they do, changing the way that they deliver what they do. So I don't think anything's come to a crushing standstill. What we're seeing is people finding different ways to keep on doing what they do.
And we're touching on that focus on the longer term, which of course is so important. And Jacqueline, I know the clean air zone, for example, has been delayed given the current pressures that we face. It's obviously still hugely important for us to keep an eye on those longer term challenges around the environment, around sustainability. But how tough is it to balance that at the moment with the short term focus on the immediate problems that we face?
Well, I think to a large extent that touches on the recovery element, and we're starting to see, so the internet is awash with what the recovery from this might look like in the context of the whole climate challenge. So we're committed, as are all our constituent authorities, to addressing climate change, and Birmingham as well has a very ambitious target for addressing the climate challenge. And I think it's understanding what that recovery will look like, and making sure we have an eye to the longer term and not rushing to then invest in things that are, for example, fossil fuel heavy, or thinking about our longer term plans that we had in place around housing, transport, and how we're going to work with those as part of the recovery. Also thinking about things like skills. We touched on retail. Just what will our town centres look like as we start to come out of this coronavirus pandemic? So it's thinking about some of those immediate effects, but with a long-term lens, or looking through a climate change lens, and also with a view, I guess, to the social inclusion agenda as well, and the impact that this has had on people, and how we can work with some of the projects and programs we had in place to look at sustainability and climate change, and how they can then support the recovery going forward.
You talk about it.
Could I just add to that?
Of course.
Sorry to jump in, but it strikes me that one of the things that matters here is that, as if you like, as an industry, as a sector, we need to be thinking about communities, not just accommodation. And when I talk about accommodation, I don't just mean housing. I mean commercial. I mean retail as well. What's really come out of all of this dreadful situation, is the importance of communities and how people pull together. And I think it's actually communities that will drive recovery from this, much more so than necessarily just banks or retailers or office providers doing any one particular thing. It will be a sense of everybody pulling together, and it will be communities that drive this recovery. And that plays absolutely to the sustainability point, that if you create sustainable and valuable and viable communities, that's how you drive recovery from this.
Within that, what responsibilities land with the real estate industry then?
Gosh, well, it's everything that we do, isn't it? In its simplest sense, it's everything that we do, from bringing forward land for development, to actually thinking about how we develop that land, who we're developing it for, how it's going to be used. So the big change that may come out of this might be a change in mindset. We could potentially see a generational change here in how people want to interact with their houses, how people want to buy things. You could see a massive shift to online retail. You could potentially see people not choosing to go back to high street shopping. That opens up massive opportunities for city centre further redevelopment. And I don't think it means the death of the high street at all. I think there's a good case for saying that what you might actually see a shift towards in the medium term is district centre regeneration.
Michael, would you agree with David's thoughts there?
I do. I mean, I think that there's going to be a seismic shift in attitude, both from a business point of view, but from an individual's point of view. We're all going to see things differently. I think one of the most heartwarming things that I've heard said recently as people have been out shopping is, why are people being so nice to each other? And I think it's this whole, even ironically, as though even though we're having to socially distance, when you see people having to keep that distance and abide by it, people are actually, by and large, sticking to it. So I think this will be a game changer in terms of rules. I think in terms of the real estate's approach, quite clearly everybody wants the real estate to be successful as a sector in the future. So if that means taking a different route to policy, so I think there's been a fairly slow shift in terms of policy I wouldn't say policy change. I think policy has been changing, but I think the willingness to adhere to major changes to policy has often been resisted, perhaps because of the supply chain not being geared up to deal with it in the past. But I think now, there will be huge pressure from society in general for those changes to happen, and businesses will, I guess, inevitably want to comply because they want to succeed. And I think we will, after this crisis is past us, the need to placemake, the need to regenerate, the need to invest in high quality places to work, homes, infrastructure that's needed to support all of that will still be there. I think just the shape and the approach to it will be different. And I think, as ever with any crisis, we always learn from them, don't we? And I think there will be some innovation that comes out of it. I think there'll be some opportunity that we will see people taking with both hands and making those changes. So it probably doesn't feel like a positive position for most people at the moment. There's clearly a lot of uncertainty because we're at the start of this lockdown. But I think at the end, when we look back, we will start to see those, hopefully, those positive changes.
Yeah, I would hope you're right. I'm going to throw out a question here that we've had on Slido. This is from Bill Howell at VZ Properties. He asks, with the rise of populism, fake news, climate change and COVID, is it now time for Birmingham to readdress its position in the world as a multicultural city region? Might we harness investment from the Middle and Far East to develop the housing infrastructure and lifestyle we need for our future? Who'd like to jump in on that one?
Well, I could start if you like. I have
Sure.
to say, I think we probably already are seeing an influx of money from those markets. I'm aware of developments that are largely funded by, if you like, overseas cash. So I don't think that would be a new thing. I think we're already seeing overseas money. We're already seeing institutional money from overseas and sovereign wealth fund investment coming in. So actually, this might open up the potential for more of that, but I don't think it would be a new thing.
Jacqueline, your thoughts?
So yeah, I mean, in terms of positioning us as a location for international inward investment, I think that we've worked hard with that, and I know Birmingham as well has already done a considerable amount of work with sister cities in the Far East. So Guangzhou is one of the cities that Birmingham's worked very closely with. And so from a kind of public sector international relations perspective, I think those relationships, as you say, have been there for some time. And there's no reason why we wouldn't continue to work in that way.
I wanted to return, Jacqueline, to a point you made when we were talking about the longer-term focus. And you mentioned there, I think, the risk of a rush to return to, I suppose, quote unquote, business as usual once this time passes. Is there a danger, do you think, that as we push for economic growth once more, when this time passes, that we don't have that opportunity to consider what we've learned over these weeks, potentially months?
So I think at the minute it's hard to say, and this is going to go. This could go one of two ways. So we could either see a rebound that goes straight back to business as usual, or maybe even worse. And I was talking to colleagues in transportation that were looking at, or have been looking at, for example, sales of airline tickets, which apparently for January are up a considerable amount on same sales from last year. So I think people have been isolated, and there's a potential that everyone is going to rush to reconnect in high carbon ways. But I think, as we've also heard on this call this morning, there are real lessons that we can take from what we've seen here. And, during this time, which, is horrendous for many, many people, and I wouldn't want to forget that or, not be mindful of that. But I think there's also time for us to kind of pause and reflect and think about the different types of future that we could create, the different types of places we could create, the way that, we want to make our future growth inclusive of all communities. And we've also heard about, growing community spirit. So I think, there are different scenarios that could play out. And I think there's an opportunity to direct that going forward. And we just need to think very carefully and deliberately around how we do that.
Michael, your thoughts on how you'd like to see real estate stepping in and directing that new vision that Jacqueline talks about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will undoubtedly be a huge wave of excitement from the public in terms of when the restrictions are lifted. The hospitality sector, the retail sector, is likely to be active again. I think I think Jackie's point about trying to capture and learn from this will be important along the way. I mean, I don't think you're going to be able to stop people sort of trying to carry on as normal, but I think it's going to take big decision makers, government, investors to learn from this experience and place in those sort of position pointers, the resilience that we've talked about before, so that if we are ever placed in a situation like this again, then we can continue with some normality. But I think I think the issue here is enabling people to have some form of normality at the end of this, and then business will shape around it. The real estate will respond accordingly. And if the space, I think David mentioned before, city centre space will be different in terms of what's required. So I think there'll be a kind of a transitional period, and the recovery. We've had various discussions internally about the shape of that recovery. Is it a V-shaped? Is it skip-shaped? So I think very much how people respond will determine the nature of the recovery. And lest we forget, people have been saying for the last couple of weeks the more that people stay in, the shorter this period will be. So I mean, it's that really, isn't it? It's the time that we take, because 2 or 3 weeks feels like a long time at the moment. If it's 3 months or 6 months, that will I think reflect on how we respond to this from an economic point of view.
We're almost out of time for this first panel today, but I wonder if, to close, I could ask each of you to leave our viewers with some inspiring thoughts on one big opportunity that you'd like to see Birmingham grasping when you look ahead and when we make it through the current challenges. David, could I kick off with you? Sure.
So when I thought about what Birmingham is, and I'm a Birmingham boy myself, it's always struck me that Birmingham maybe has never had enough swagger. We've always been the squeezed middle. We're not quite north enough to be the north. We're not quite south enough to be London. We're the difficult bit in the middle, the squeezed middle. So the opportunity for us, I think, when you look at all of the fantastic projects that have been delivered over the last 20 years, things like Grand Central, the Bull Ring, Curzon Street and everything that's going on there, Brindley Place, the Conservatoire, the increasing residential presence in the city centre. There's so much for us to talk about. So the opportunity for us as a city, I think, is to chat a lot more about who we are, what we are, and where we want to be.
And show that swagger.
Absolutely.
Michael, your thoughts?
Well, the one that springs to mind, and I touched upon it earlier on, is we've got the Commonwealth Games coming up. Can we turn that into the biggest party the West Midlands has ever had? Give the communities and people hope in terms of that's something we can focus on. There's clearly real estate development coming out of that, but just in terms of attracting people to the city, that swagger that we've just touched upon, we have a real opportunity of selling the city with that as our big window. HS2 is planned to come forward. We're on the first stop out of London, so I think there's still some huge infrastructure and huge development projects that are going to bring a focus to the city and provide a spotlight that hopefully will enable us to have that swagger.
Yes, indeed. And Jacqueline, final thoughts from you?
So I think both of those are great points. And I think for me, one of the things that's emerged very recently is the power of communities working together in order to help us, or in order to help, each other, in order to help the NHS. And so I think, harnessing that as part of kind of an all-stakeholder approach to tackling climate change, I think is really important. And I think we've seen a glimpse of what people are able to do when they work together and collaborate. So I wouldn't like people to forget what we've been able to do through community spirit and people coming together to support each other.
Absolutely not. That's a great message to close on. Well, we are almost out of time for the first of today's two panels, but thank you to my guests for joining us. We will have a short break, and we'll be back at 11:30 with a discussion about Birmingham's regeneration and its support of future communities. Hope you can join us then, but thanks for watching for now.